Hi, and welcome to the Locker Room. I'm one of your hosts, Justin Ham, and thank you so much for joining us as we journey through tough issues that guys face as athletes and as humans. Let's welcome our guest today, Coach Gregg Johns, as he is here today to help us navigate the questions of guys, God, and does it matter? Greg, thank you so much for being here. Just before we jump into it, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, it's great to be here. I think this is my first podcast that I've been a guest on, so that's kind of exciting. I'm a 28-year veteran of teaching and coaching, various levels, only two different school districts. I currently teach in a 7 through 12 public high school building in upstate New York. And I'm in my 19th year here and my 28th altogether, like I said. And this is where I plan on ending my career here in 4 years or so.
That's awesome. So, well, what got you into being a PE teacher?
My high school soccer coach, who was a great mentor of mine, got me involved in working with some younger kids on weekends with some youth soccer. I enjoyed that and I enjoyed sports. And so I proceeded to graduate high school. I went to Canisius College in Buffalo, New York, and majored in phys ed, got my degree. And I got my first job in the fall of 1997, which is a long time ago. And yeah, the rest has kind of been history. I don't know anything different in my professional life besides teaching and coaching.
So what got you into this in the first place actually was the influence of a coach.
Yeah, I mean, he was always, I'm not sure he was a believer necessarily, but he coached with some principles that I now wish I had coached with a little more in my younger years of coaching.
Sure.
He still continues to be somebody that's in my life. He actually came to one of our soccer games this past fall. And that was a great moment for me. He got to talk to our team, which was really exciting.
Yeah.
And I actually, when I was at the school district I was at before I came to where I am today, I was the head soccer coach there, and I actually coached against him in a game,
Wow.
which was one of my most gratifying professional coaching moments, was competing against the guy that was my one of my great mentors as I came up through.
Yeah, that must have been a very surreal experience being on the sideline opposite somebody who helped pour into you and shape you into who you became.
Yeah, it was, but once the game starts, it's the game, and you're trying to win. And I was fortunate that day that my team did win. But he always, even when things didn't go his way, even when I was a player for him and even coaching against him, he was always gracious in defeat, and he was always humble when he won. And I always admired those traits.
Yeah, man, that makes a lot of sense. You had mentioned that even though he might not have been a believer, there were certain principles or characteristics that he instilled. What are some of those?
He felt there was no need for, even though we were guys, to use foul language, use that for an example. That wasn't something that was condoned in our locker room, on our practice field, on the game field, on the school bus, or any place like that. He expected us to be role models in and out of the
Sure.
school building. He expected us to be respectful of all individuals within the school building, teachers, staff, students,
Yeah.
support staff, custodians. And now that I look back, I realize that that's a lot of the same principles that we try to coach with, but we coach from a Christian perspective, where obviously we're serving something much greater than ourselves.
Yeah. And full disclosure, for those of you listening on the podcast, Greg is one of my best friends, and he's actually somebody that I coach with. So when he says we coach, it's actually us coaching together. He's the head soccer coach, and I get to assist him. So that's been something really cool to see along the last few years of this, is actually watching him implement these things that he's talking about. So there's a little bit of context there. So tell our audience, if you would, Greg, what are some of the things, and what began, knowing your story, knowing you for as long as I have, there's things that I know, but what began shifting your approach? You had mentioned earlier these characteristics that your coach instilled you wish you had jumped into sooner. What was some of the changing points for you in that situation?
I think, well, obviously, I coached for 2 years of my career before I became a believer.
Sure.
And I think I had a mixture of both sides, one foot in, what my high school coach tried to get me to do, and then the other foot in kind of what I, as a young coach, wanted to do, just in terms of just winning.
Yeah.
And then I got saved when I was 25, and there was a lot of things that changed immediately. But the first thing was is how I spoke to my kids,
Sure.
and how I expected them to speak to others, and that was not easy because I think especially in our culture, especially guys, they feel like that's a sign of strength and power and authority, where I realize now that that's more of a sign of weakness and lack of discipline.
Yeah.
But there were other things too, in terms of like the moral compass, what I expected of them in terms of their behavior off the field, with girls they were dating, and now in today's world, as opposed to way back then, social media,
Yep.
different things like that, where their whole life is an open book. And even to the point where, I'm very open right now with my faith, where I really wasn't probably for a while leading up to it. I didn't really know what it looked like, and what that meant. I had a hard time deciphering as a coach. We don't like to hear the word when a coach calls us soft, but like, what's the difference between being soft and being honorable when it comes to things, especially if they don't go your way. Um, and I just feel like there's, it's definitely, it's been a process. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm obviously, I'm coming up on almost 30 years in, so there's a lot of stuff that I would tell 28-year-old Greg that now 50-year-old Greg knows because he's gone through it.
Sure.
And just like anything, a lot of it is just what works, what doesn't work. But the big thing is just being consistent. And if you're gonna portray a message, especially for us as believers, you better do your best to walk in that. And if you step in a way that maybe the heat of the moment gets you or something, it's important to be able to own that as well.
Yeah.
And let the guys know that you can admit when maybe you've been
Mhm.
at fault for something also.
So as a current coach and as an FCA volunteer, and you've been someone who's led huddles, how has the response been seeing your teams as you're leading out more in your faith? What's the response been from your players? And I'm only asking because I know there might be coaches out there that are kind of hesitant, but I think they'd be excited to hear what your response has been.
Yeah, I think you'd be surprised to know how it's not shied away from in terms of when you bring that to them. And it's not so much just going in and saying, well, this verse means something to me, and I think it means something to our team. It's important for them to know why.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, they have to know, number one, you're coming to them at a place of love.
Yeah.
And one thing that we say that I think was said to us by another coach was, in order to push them hard, you've got to love them hard. And in that love, I think we say, you know what, this is why I'm the way I am, and this is what's important to me. And the way that I'm coaching you now is built on not a foundation of what I know as a coach or the games we've won or whatever the case is. It's built on the moral principles that our Savior has for us to live out.
Yeah.
And in a public school, it's always a little different. It's
Sure.
always a little more dicey. But the more that we progress kind of in this journey, the more you realize that kids in general, staff members in general, they're searching. They
Yeah.
don't know. They're usually searching for stuff in the wrong places, and they're searching for satisfaction in the wrong area.
Yeah.
And I'm at a place in my career now where I just feel like before I leave, they really have to know, where I stand, and then they can make the choice where they want to go from there.
Yeah. What do you think it is? Because that's a perfect segue into kind of where I was hoping we could spend some time. What do you think it is? What do you think it is that our society or culture, our boys specifically, what do you think it is that they're searching for?
Well, I think they're searching for somebody to show them how to be a man.
Yeah.
They're searching for they're looking for masculinity in all of the wrong places, and a lot of time that's in relationships, that's in substances,
Yeah.
that's in how they treat other people, that to make them feel inferior.
Right.
Whereas, true strength of character is, integrity is who you are when nobody's looking. So, who are you, behind the screen? Who are you behind the keyboard? Who are you? We talk about the other 22 hours of the day. Like, we can see you when we have you from 3 to 5, or when we have you on a bus riding home. We can see you. We kind of know what you're up to at that point, but those other 22 or 21 hours of the day, that's really one of those things where you're in charge of who you are and what you surround yourself with. I use an analogy with our players. I'm like, if you put one foot in a rowboat and you put one foot on the shore, eventually something's going to give.
Yeah.
And, one of those things could be good on the shore. You could be safe and your boat floats away, or you could end up in the water and you could be in a situation where you can't swim. And their personal lives, their social media, their extracurriculars, those are all things that we probably spend more time talking about those things than we actually talk about, hey, what are we going to do as a team to collectively try to win? Because if we're not all rowing in the same direction,
Right.
you can't possibly get where you want to go.
Yeah, that's so true. And very rarely is it the X's and O's, because those things typically take care of themselves. But it's just this idea of, what are they looking for? Who are they looking to? And I know one of the things that I see is a lot of times they're trying to get this idea of manliness, masculinity from our culture. And we know what our culture says. It's kind of like what you said. It's how many girls are you hooking up with? What are you saying to them when you're hooking up with them? Are you taking other people? Are you putting them down or lifting them up? And Hollywood and media, social media, it's all just kind of perverted that whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just looking for things that are going to be temporal,
Mm,
and it's nothing that's going to be permanent.
yeah.
And like I said, I lived 25 years before I became a believer, and the only reason I started going to church at first was because there was a pretty girl that I was interested in, and she went to church, and I'm like, well, why not? And what stuck to me most was her strength of character and her unwillingness to waver, as far as what she believed in, her unwillingness to compromise. And therefore, when I came to faith, I took a lot of different things in my life that I removed,
Yeah.
brought some different things in, and then about a decade or so ago, unfortunately, it took me a long time, but really tried to implement it into how I coach and what the locker room climate is like, and what the practice field climate is like, and the school bus and the hallway and those types of things. Where I feel like as a Christian coach, especially if you're a younger coach and you're worried, oh, they're going to fire me if I say this, or geez, I really need to get tenure, or I just started coaching, I don't want to blow it. Just lead by example in those cases, and the kids will ask. They're going to wonder why. Why doesn't coach swear at us? Everybody else swears at us. Why doesn't coach throw stuff and flip benches on the sideline? And there's times that we need to get into them a little bit and let them hear us, and that we need to challenge them. But we could still challenge them on and off the field or the court or whatever your dynamic is. We can always challenge them in a way that glorifies the Lord.
Yeah, I know for me, one of my things growing up without a dad, my coaches were people in my life that I looked up to. And, I was fortunate enough to play for some really great coaches who did a good job of pouring into us and character building and all of that. And there's some other coaches that did not. So that's one of the things that I try to think about, looking just on the team that I coach currently. There's some guys that don't have a dad in the picture, or their dad isn't there anymore. So that might be the only opportunity that they see to see what a man looks like, but let alone a godly man. So that's something that I think as coaches we need to take very seriously.
Yeah, and in so many cases, with just the way that life is, if you take a student athlete that does have two parents at home, and that child is in school for 7 hours and then at practice for a couple hours or a game, or if it's an away game, it's even longer. Truth be told, those children are going to be in our midst longer over the course of a school day than they're going to be with their own parents.
Mhm.
And that's where our influence as coaches, we have to take that very seriously, and look beyond just the results on the field
Right.
or the court. Take those seriously. Obviously, none of us are in this just to see how many games we can lose. We always want to compete, but to realize that these kids, especially if we're coaching males, to really get them to realize, what does accountability look like in terms of your conduct? What does reliability look like in terms of your team? How does that translate into what's going to take you to life after your sport?
That's right.
And that's where I think, like, we've hit the mark a little better in the last several years, was making sure that they knew that was a priority while still trying to compete and be the best version of ourselves that we can.
Yeah. What would be something that, in a specific example maybe of a time? I mean, I know this year for us coaching soccer, we didn't have as many wins as maybe we thought we would. What was something that you really tried to go into each practice and each game with that mindset of? Because obviously we kind of knew what we lost last year. We lost a lot, but we still had guys coming back.
Yeah.
But outside of the wins and losses, what were some of the things you were looking at in terms of how to lead these young men?
Yeah, I think it was for them to know that we were still in it for them, even when things weren't going great.
Yeah.
I mean, our record this year wasn't great by our standards. Some schools would have been thrilled with where
Yeah.
our record, but that's just not kind of where
Mhm.
where we're at. But I think also they needed to know that, we weren't completely result oriented. We still cared for them and loved them as young men and as children of God, more so than just a team that finished a couple games under 500.
Sure.
And one thing that we try to do is every day at practice, we always try to at least make physical contact, pat a shoulder. I'm learning how to dap now. That's a thing. I'm a big handshake guy, so I'm learning how to do one of those. Um, fist bump, whatever your thing is. And always every day we tell them collectively as a team we love them.
Mhm.
And sometimes it's right after a game when they might think the world is falling down. Like, listen, guys, you need to know this. Like, we love you, but we played terrible today and we need to fix that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't change how we feel about you as people.
Yeah, how has your response been? Because that's something that we have been intentional about, letting the kids know, that guys know that we love them. Have you seen that kind of, what's been the results of that?
Well, truthfully, they're not used to hearing it.
Hmm.
And that's kind of one of those things like, you know, we love them in different ways. Sometimes loving them is pulling them in aside, one on one and just being like, listen, you really screwed up. Like,
Yeah.
you shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have said this. You shouldn't have got that card. What you did was unfair. Hey, you were late for practice. That's nonsense. That can't happen. Sometimes that's love. But other times love is, hey man, how's your grandma? I know she's sick. And I know this, what's going on right now in your family is tough. Please let us know if we can do anything. And then, if you're going to say those things, obviously you need to, you need to fulfill those things. You
Right.
need to follow through with those things.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing, is I think a lot of times young men in general, I think aren't great at expressing how they feel, let alone the L word. I think that is something that can be a little uncomfortable, but as someone who's seen from the side as it's happening and how they respond to you, and by extension of you, even to me at times, which I know I sometimes get to smell good off of you. But the idea is that it does, like, they actually seem to believe it.
Yeah, and I think that's all about trying to live it out.
Yeah.
For me, obviously, I'm an older guy. I have a couple sons that came through our program and are now in college, and I've been married for coming up on 25 years, and I think we're not afraid to kind of let those guys into our home, and so they can kind of see what that looks like here,
Yeah.
and the consistency of being their coach still when we're on the field, and them knowing who I am when I'm home. I think they can see both things translate. And truthfully, I think in order to get the most out of them on the field, I think they have to know that you're pouring into them off the field and in the school building and in that sector of their life.
Yeah, I think if all they think about, if they equate their value to only what I can bring coach by how I play my sport, then I think we've missed the mark.
Absolutely. Yep. They need to, and what we're trying to do here, and any of the coaches that are out there that might coach at smaller districts like ours, we're really trying to equip them for life after high school,
Mhm.
and using the sport as a vessel to get them to where they're successful in whatever their next thing is, whatever's next for them, their next chapter. We're just trying to do it in a way that conveys the love of Jesus.
That's right.
And it's not always easy, especially in those heat of the moment battles. It's not always easy, but it is important to take that second to reflect on what you're going to say just for a split second before it actually comes out of your mouth.
Yeah.
And that's important. And that's one of those discernment types things that I certainly didn't always have as a young coach, and even as a coach that was somewhat experienced.
Yeah.
That I think is important for all coaches to reflect on.
No, I think so. And I think that's one of the things that, we talk about masculinity, like a man takes inventory of the words that he says. He doesn't just say things recklessly. So kind of with that thought in mind of, what does like a man actually look like? Some of these societal issues that our players are faced with are things that I think are really going to be challenging to deal with, right? Like, people can be whatever they want to be, and kind of where that is. And it's just like, how do you have you had the opportunities to help navigate any of your players through those kinds of things?
That's a little less prevalent here where we live, at least for now. It's not something that really we can necessarily speak out against in the public school,
Of course.
but We can obviously still be honorable in our personal relationships where they can see an example of how it is to, you know, coach should see that the player should see that coach treats his wife well.
Yeah.
The coach should see that I should speak highly of my wife when I have the chance to speak about her, and I should honor her with what I say.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of that stuff hasn't exactly been directly in front of us yet, although I'm sure
Right.
it's inevitable. But I think, we all as coaches know the term lead by example, and we don't always know what that looks like. But I think, leading by example to me used to just be like, okay, what was coach like? What did he want us to do? What direction was he giving us? That type of thing, as opposed to, it's more important, I think, that they see how we lead by example away from the school as opposed to actually in the school building, because that's kind of who we are as professionals, but who we are away from it is really, I think, who we are.
Right. No, I think that's true. And I think kids can tell if we're faking it. I think kids are able to understand that, coach isn't really living this out. This is just something that he's saying or whatever. Like they can tell if you're snowballing.
Well, one of the biggest mistakes that we can make as coaches is thinking that our kids, I don't want to use the word stupid, but thinking our kids are unaware.
Yeah.
Our kids are very aware. And as coaches, you have a lot of eyes on you.
Right.
You not only have your players, obviously, you have your parents, you have people that are watching your every move, everything you say. And some people are there to wait till you screw up. They want to wait, they want to see you fail. And that's where that whole living it out, I think, gives you a little bit more leeway on the back end when when you are faced in a tough situation and you do have a kid that knows you love them, but all of a sudden, listen, you're not playing good enough to be a starter right now.
Yeah.
So you got to sit down for a little while till you can figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But if they know if they know you love them and they know that you care for them as a human, they might not like it, and you wouldn't want them to like it, but they'll respond in a way that might be actually benefit them and benefit your team.
Absolutely. So just a couple more questions, just some thoughts as we're kind of wrapping up in the next few minutes is, what would be some kind of encouragement that you would give to coaches who, maybe they love the Lord and they love the idea of FCA, but there's some kind of hesitancy or they're not quite sure what the next step might look like. What would you say to that coach?
Well, everybody's at a different place in their faith, new believers, believers that have been in it for a long time. But I would just say the word authenticity, I think, is something that everybody could see through, and it doesn't look the same for me as it looks for somebody else.
Right.
Tony Dungy didn't coach the same way as Tom Landry. Right. But they were both believers.
Right.
I think it's important to be who you are when it comes to how you interact with kids, and whatever your level of comfort zone is in terms of how you share the gospel, whatever that is, in your locker room or on the practice field or on the court, whatever that is, do it in a way that that you feel led to do. Don't force that. And I'll just use one example. The Bible talks about fear, and we had a game a couple years ago that was a pretty big game for us against a team that their coach is one of my greatest friends in coaching, and he's gotten the better of me more than I've gotten the better of him. And that day we both have had good teams for years, and that was just a day when I just felt like our boys were a little bit afraid of going in and doing this. And so that was the day that I pulled out my Bible in the locker room and I read Isaiah 41:10, where Jesus talks about fear and that we have nothing to fear, for God, God is with us.
That's right.
And I told them, I'm like, if the God of the universe is on our side, then why are we afraid of this group of soccer players that are coming in here? What's to be afraid of? And that was just one of those instances where it worked to our advantage because we ended up beating them 2-0. And we put together a great performance, and that was one of those where it certainly worked in our favor. And like I said, I think it's being authentic about it and living in a way, and whatever your level of comfort is with that, and you got to get a pulse on the room too, and you got to know your team, know your personnel. But I don't think being afraid of it is something that we should be afraid of either. Yeah. And I think we all know where certain things are going societally as well, and we all know that these kids need what we needed, which was a savior.
That's right. So you mentioned it actually earlier, and I should have said it sooner, but you had the opportunity to coach both of your sons.
Yeah.
So what was that like? You're raising these young men
Yep.
and now you're coaching them
Yep.
and you're living with their parent.
Yep.
So how was that?
So my wife and I both have coached for years. She was a phenomenal soccer coach in her own right here in Middleburg, and she coached for 11 seasons as a head coach. And then when our eldest, Andrew, came up as a freshman to play varsity, she stopped coaching. So that was a huge sacrifice on her part. But I had it was an absolute blessing to coach both of them throughout their high school careers. Um, Two very different athletes and two very different personalities, but two very hardworking, very disciplined when it came to the game players. So yeah, that always added a different animal. And I was told by an older coach very early on in my career, actually, it was when I was coaching basketball, and a gentleman who knew that my wife was close to giving birth to Andrew, who's now 22, put his arm around me and he said, "I'm going to give you some advice." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Don't ever be afraid to coach your own kid." And I'm thankful for that he was willing to say that to me, because um, it can be tough doing that and then finding that I'm dad and I'm coach, but I was always dad first.
Yeah.
I always told myself that my relationship with my sons was not going to be altered by their performance as athletes. But it was a great experience. I got to watch my oldest son score his 1,000th point in an empty gym during COVID. And I got to be there when my youngest son broke the all-time New York State soccer scoring record, which got broken this year. So I got to be right in the midst of some great accomplishments and some really gratifying times with them as their dad and their coach. But we really did this together. My wife never missed a game. And when we got home those nights, the game was over. We were, I was dad, she was mom, they were Austin and Andrew. And although there was times when emotions were what they were, I was always their dad.
Yeah, that's cool. That's got to be such a unique experience coaching your own kids. I mean, I'm probably gonna know what that looks like here in a little while, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But just another last little couple questions before we just decide to wrap this up. You mentioned another coach, so you had your high school coach was the one who kind of got you into your career, and then this other coach who you must not have known that well. I mean, I know the story, so I know who it is. I won't mention his name, but he came up alongside you and said, "Hey, don't be afraid to coach your own kid."
Yeah.
So those are two coaches that were just being themselves that have played such a big part just in who you are. Plus all the other coaches you might have along the way.
Yeah. I mean, there was my high school coach, and I had a coach in college when I played soccer for a couple of years that coached in a way that I didn't want to have that style of coaching. So I did learn from him in a way that was because I didn't resonate with his style. And when I broke into coaching, I coached with a gentleman for 8 of my 9 years at my previous school, who was a phenomenal mentor for me.
Hall of Famer.
A Hall of Famer, 434, I believe, wins in his career. So I had a lot of help along the way from people that spoke into my life. And like I said, not all of them were Christians necessarily, but they spoke into my life as a young coach and as a mentor. And they're people that I will forever hold dear to my heart. And I hope that, as I mentor other coaches now, younger coaches, I hope that I do what they did for me, just as Christ would have me do.
Yeah. I'm gonna give it might be one of those questions that's kind of hard to answer, but if you could give one piece of advice to a current male athlete right now that might be just struggling with something, what would that one piece of advice be?
Any male athlete?
Any male athlete, could be basketball, soccer, just in general.
Christian athlete?
What does it look like? Just a man in general. Anyone be one of our players?
I think I would say to them, don't think you're too much of a man to need some guidance from somebody that's not you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times as men, I think we're like, I got this. I'm good. Some of them might say, I'm chilling. Some of them might say something like that, where I use this analogy with a lot of our players, and something I think we as men have a hard time with is looking or self-reflecting and looking at where am I deficient? Where am I at fault?
Yeah.
But if you look at that in terms of how you look at yourself, in terms of how you look at a team, it's the same thing. You don't get better at something or improve at something until you realize where you're struggling and where you're deficient.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say to them is, don't be afraid to look at yourself and realize that you are missing the mark somewhere. And if you don't have the answers, if you know a guy that's a mentor in your life that's going to mentor you in a way that pushes you towards what God says and what the Bible says, then you need to start searching for something a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I love that because guys do. We don't like to admit we're wrong, or we don't like to admit we're not good at something. So then asking those people those pointed questions sometimes aren't always what we want to hear. And the last question, if you had a chance to talk to your younger self, so your 23, 24-year-old self, what's one piece of advice you would want to say to him?
I would say early on, take my role as a young coach who was within 5 or 6 years from guys playing for me, take my role as a mentor more seriously. And then after I got saved when I was 25, I wish I was living it out when I was 25 through 35, the way that I've tried to live it out from 35 on.
Yeah.
And to just really take that opportunity seriously, but also don't expect yourself to be perfect.
Yeah.
Because we're still human, we're still going to make mistakes. And a lot of times, owning our mistake and being able to backtrack and realize that you may have stepped off a little bit. That's just as important as towing that line, because everybody's gonna mess up or say something that they might regret.
Absolutely. Well, sir, thank you so much for being willing to come on the locker room and talk a little bit about this. Is there any other parting pearls of wisdom you would like to dispense to those listening?
I would just say, take your faith and your walk seriously. Don't expect it to be without some bumps in the road. And when you feel that tug or feel that nudge to maybe step out a little bit and maybe be a little more outspoken than you normally would, there's a reason for that. And be prepared. Be prepared for it. Because when those opportunities present themselves, especially if you're in a public school locker room or a public school field, those opportunities are rare. So we have to seize those opportunities because we never know what other opportunity these kids are going to get to have a Christian male speak life into them.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. And for those of you that are listening, on March 8th, we're actually going to be having a Northeast Regional Coaches Convention where we have the chaplain for the Cleveland Browns and the Cleveland Cavaliers. He's going to be flying into Albany for the day. He's going to be hosting a coaches conference, and we would love to have you come if that's something that you're interested in, because as FCA is growing here in our region, we're looking for coaches like Gregg, like people who've been on our podcast in the past who love the Lord and are willing to take that step out in faith and impart what they believe to their teams. Because just from our conversation tonight, you can hear how important it is to have the influence of a coach. And those are just a few coaches that Gregg mentioned that might not even have been believers. So we're really looking to grow. So if that's something as a coach that speaks to you, I would love to have you get in touch with me. There's many positions within FCA you could be. We're always looking for more staff, but if you're interested in leading a huddle and finding out more about how to do a huddle with your team, that would be a great opportunity. So I just wanted to thank you again, Gregg. We'll do a little dap right now.
My pleasure.
Look at that. He's getting good at the dapping. So thank you all so much, and tune in next week.